Look at Job and his example of worship in this text. But before we go any further, I want us to read the chapter together. So Morgan, can you go ahead and start us off?
Absolutely. All right, Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land."
To 19.
Oh, my bad. The chat say 10. Okay, I got you.
Sorry.
It's okay. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabians fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you."
Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So thank you. Okay, so when I was first asked to do a teaching about worship and was given Job, I was a little taken aback because the last time I read it was 2 years ago. And I honestly tried to avoid it ever since because I didn't want any part of Job. I didn't want to be associated with suffering in my mind. And I didn't want to invite a Job season into my life, which I know like reading the word doesn't mean that you're going to go through that exact season of what you're reading. But I was still like, let me stay far away from that because that man suffered badly. So I'm thinking, how am I supposed to create a teaching about worship when the book of Job seems clearly about suffering and endurance? But when I actually started studying the text, I noticed something I never paid attention to before in chapter 1, where he immediately worshiped. I've always been stuck on a part where he shaved his head and tore his clothes, and I didn't even realize what followed was worship. So it just looked different from what I've always known. I've always understood worship as singing songs, praising God, and expressing it mostly through music. But as I've grown, especially through this series with Brandy and Kashara, I've been exposed to broader worship expressions of worship. So when I looked up the root word in this chapter in Hebrew, I found that it was called shakah, which means to bow down or prostrate oneself before a superior. So that shifted everything for me because Job's worship was physical, it was humble, it was surrendered. And honestly, it was really a surprising response for someone who just lost everything. So Job had it all. He was described as the greatest man of the East, meaning he had wealth, influence, and status. So he really was that guy. So to go from having everything and to losing it all, receiving all that news in one sitting, that he immediately bowed down, blessing God's name without hesitation, is powerful. So he didn't focus on what he lost. Instead, he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So Job knew something we don't always grasp. He was onto something, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from him. So that brings me from my first point, earthly riches and heart posture. So this verse particular stood out to me while I was reading, which was Job chapter 1, verse 21. So again, it said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And here, Job is speaking on earthly riches, which reminds me of another scripture, Matthew 6:19 through 21. And it says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart is also. So this is what I believe Job understood. As a faithful servant to the Lord, his heart was pure, with a genuine love for God. His heart was not set on earthly treasures because he knew they could all be destroyed, as he was experiencing that in real time. So therefore, I believe this is one reason why he responded with worship. It was his heart posture. So what does your heart look like when it comes to the things the Lord has blessed you with? If they were gone tomorrow, would you still bless God? So in my personal life, I'm jumping ahead. So Job shows us his heart posture through his reaction. Despite the situation he was in, the very beginning of his storm and trial, he still blessed God's name. It reminds me of the song Promises by Maverick City, especially the part that says, I'll still bless you in the middle of my storm, in the middle of my trial. So, how many of us have that immediate reaction to bless God's names when things aren't going our way? And for me in my personal life, it was a journey to get there. And even now, I still have moments where my initial reaction is frustration. Before I was really locked in with the Lord, I used to complain, complain, complain. I had a constant why me mentality because it felt like something was happening on the daily. And back then, my reaction wasn't to worship God. The first thing I would do was call my friends, call my siblings, and vent to them about anything I was going through. Then after that, I would actually pray about it to God to get me out the situation. But it was never first, and sometimes I wouldn't even do that at all. So my heart wasn't truly focused on the right things, and I didn't have the right perspective through a godly lens. So now that I have a relationship with the Lord and understand that He won't leave me nor forsake me, and that everything in this life is temporary, my response to mishaps, loss, or things that look different than I usually expect, now I thank Him in advance for bringing me through, for teaching me something new, and for revealing things to me that needs to be addressed. So I'm learning that there's always a purpose behind it all. So it leads me to my second point, which is surrender. So Job shows us what it looks like to surrender when things are completely out of control. He immediately fell to the ground in a posture that expressed surrender. So let's take a look back at verse 20, and it says, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped. So here we see a physical sign of both mourning and surrender. When Job tore his robe and shaved his head, it was an expression of grief over the loss of his children and everything he had. But when he fell to the ground in worship, that was an act of surrender to the Lord. I believe that this is the kind of surrender God desires from us. No matter what we're going through, big or small, it's a posture where we release control and we simply worship Him. It's saying, God, you are in control. There is nothing I can do. You gave these things to me and you can take them away. My life is in your hands. So lately, God has been teaching me how to surrender on a deeper level. It's easy to surrender things that feel small and don't really affect your life much. But when it comes to deeper areas like your career, relationships, moving into new territory, or finances, these are things that require real trust in the Lord. That's when it becomes challenging. I had a situation where I realized this. I'm someone who usually has control over my plans, especially my travel plans. And when I plan something, it typically goes smoothly. But recently, I had a full trip planned, flights booked, accommodation secured, excursions ready. We almost made it out the group chat. But suddenly, a war broke out in the exact location I was supposed to go. Ooh, I was shocked. I was shocked and I was tore up. And I never experienced anything like that before. And my immediate thought was, what am I going to do? But in that moment, like I realized I had to surrender. And that situation was completely out of my control. There was literally nothing I could do. Um, and because I was studying Job at that time, I found myself mirroring his posture. I literally got on my knees, I opened my hands, and I was just like, Lord, I surrender. Whatever it is that you want from me, I'll do it. If the trip is canceled, it's canceled. If you want me to go somewhere else, I'll go. But ultimately, you are in control. And that was hard for me because I'm someone who is used to things going my way, and I'm actively trying to move from like perfectionism. But in that moment, I had to release control. And I think that's what we see in Job. Even when God blesses you with something and then allows it to be taken away, you don't curse his name, you bless his name, and you surrender because he is the one who gave it, he is the one who can take it away, and he is the one who is in control of it all. So having a posture of surrender keeps us in a vulnerable place before the Lord. It shows our trust in Him, our dependence in Him, our acknowledgement that He is truly Lord over our lives. It also reflects a heart of gratitude, no matter the outcome. So that brings me to my final point, no blame to the Lord. Taking a look at verse 22, it says, throughout all of this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. So if we look back at verses 6 through 12, we see that God allowed Satan to do this job. So in a sense, God permitted this situation to happen. And earlier in the chapter, Job is described as blameless and upright, someone who intercedes for his family and is a faithful servant to God. And because of that, it could be easy for him to feel confused, question everything, and ultimately blame God for what is happening. But he didn't. Why? Even in the unknown, Job remained faithful to God and kept his integrity. He had a deep loyalty to God, whether he experienced good or hardship. He understood that he should never curse God's name. With this mindset, Job proved Satan wrong, that even if everything taken away, he would still remain faithful. So we see this even more clearly in chapter 2 during a conversation between Job and his wife. In verses 9 through 10, it reads, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive adversity? In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. So, what can we learn from this? We should never curse God's name or place blame on him, whether we are experiencing good or hardship. God has a purpose in everything he allows, just as he did with Job. On our end, we're called to remain faithful and trust that he is working, even when we cannot see it or fully understand it in that moment. If Job had cursed God or blamed him, the enemy would have been proven right, and we cannot have that. So we should take this and apply it to our own lives. And the next time things get tough and you feel yourself getting frustrated or ready to blame God, you have to pause and ask, what might God be teaching me here? What if this is a test? What if this is for his glory? There's always a purpose, We just have to hold on to our integrity and remain faithful to God. So, overall, Job is an excellent example of what it looks like to worship in the middle of a storm without even knowing what he did wrong. He did not focus on earthly riches. He maintained a pure heart posture before the Lord, surrendered, and did not curse God's name. This takes a different level of trust and faithfulness to the Lord. And all of this we can learn from Job. When tough seasons arise, we can use him as a reminder that there's a purpose in what God allows us to go through. If we look at how his story ends in Job 42, verse 10, it says, "And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before." So this shows that God honored Job's faithfulness, restored him, and even doubled what he had before. So I believe the story will never end bad. When we go through tough times, God will honor your faithfulness, whether it's here on earth or in heaven. Thank you.